In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision in the case of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, reaffirming constitutional rights and boosting Second Amendment protections across the country. Despite the court's ruling, governors and lawmakers within the Democratic Party started writing new laws and restrictions, once again trampling on the rights of their own constituents in their never-ending quest to pass gun control laws. In addition to state lawmakers, unelected bureaucrats within the ATF have tried to unilaterally infringe upon your constitutional rights, sparking dozens of legal challenges in the process. My guest today is Cody Wisniewski, president of the Firearms Policy Coalition Action Foundation, which has been the tip of the spear in dozens of pivotal cases that have helped secure Americans' constitutional rights. Cody, thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
So real quick, can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role with the organization?
Yeah, so I'm Cody Wisniewski. I'm president of FPC Action Foundation, which is a sister organization to Firearms Policy Coalition. And we work together to achieve our, shared mission of, a world of maximal human liberty. So most of our work these days deals with the Second Amendment and individual gun rights. And so we have lawsuits across the country, ranging from everything from so-called assault weapons bans to, fights against the ATF and the administration, just aiming to vindicate peaceable people and ensure that they can exercise their rights as they see fit.
Yeah, you guys are the tip of the spear on a lot of this stuff. I mean, there are some intense legal battles being waged across the United States. I think I saw on your portal, you guys have, 55 active cases right now?
As of today, I think we hit 56. We just launched a new case yesterday. So, we've got quite a few active across the country.
What are some of the biggest cases you have right now?
A lot of people have been following along and have seen our lawsuits against the ATF. Those have been kind of the big ones. So, of course, ATF and Department of Justice under this administration have promulgated a couple of rules targeting people's, rights. And so we have a lawsuit that deals with the Biden administration's, framer receiver rule, which basically sought to regulatorily redefine the term firearm in the country. That case is going to be up before the Supreme Court next term. We have another case dealing with the administration's pistol brace rule, of course, where they targeted pistol braces and attempted to reclassify millions of firearms across the country and, functionally make people felons overnight with the stroke of a pen. So those two have been two of our bigger cases. But of course, we've got cases against California, New York, Washington, Oregon, and every other state in between.
Yeah, and it seems like even so the Bruin decision came down about 2 years ago, and I'm sure most people, especially if you're watching this video, are already familiar with it. But post-Bruin, it seems as though states like New York and California, all the ones you have all these lawsuits in, have gone out of their way to try to get around it by simply reclassifying as many public places as possible, sensitive places, to sort of try to find a loophole around this, even though the Supreme Court was very clear in its decision. What do you make of all the strategies that are being used by lawmakers throughout the country in a post-Bruin world?
It's offensive at a base level, right? These people just have no regard for peaceable people and for individuals and for the people living in their state. They just really what they're doing is they're preventing people from protecting their own lives and being able to defend themselves. That's all any of this is. And so at its base level, it's just offensive and just morally bankrupt. Beyond that, politicians, well, I think those three might all be the same thing. They use these tactics, and of course, if they get smacked down, then they attempt to skirt law or skirt precedent, right? And so we went from this problem where we were dealing with people not being able to get permits to carry firearms, and now as soon as the Supreme Court says that you have to grant a permit unless the person is otherwise a prohibited person, basically, or otherwise prohibited. Now, of course, they're saying, okay, well, we'll give you a permit, but you can't carry your gun anywhere. And so it's just the next step. But the important part of that means we're winning, right? That means we're backing them into a corner, and we're taking ground, and we're making them have to take different tactics in order to try and do this. So, you never want to see them passing these laws. It's offensive that they do so, but it also demonstrates that we're having success.
And it speaks to how out of touch they are with the average person. And some people make the argument that, excuse me, in big cities like New York, where you have more concentrated population, it makes more sense that they would want to have firearm regulations, but you're still depriving your own citizens of the ability to defend themselves in the event that they would need to, especially in some of these areas that are high crime. We got New York, we got Chicago, we got, all the areas that we come in on Monday and we talk about the gun stats for. These are all the areas that have the most, well, as you said, offensive gun control laws that stop people from being able to defend themselves in these areas. And it shows how out of touch the politicians are with wanting to have a disarmed populace where criminals are the only ones with weapons. I mean, are there do you see any progress at all over the past couple of years from any significant number of people in these states and these cities starting to come around to more expansive gun rights?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's been a big shift. I think, COVID caused a big shift. The unrest that occurred after COVID obviously caused like a big shift as well. And so I think more and more people are exercising their rights and are interested in exercising their rights. And I think that's partly where you're seeing this kind of cultural shift too. People aren't comfortable ceding their safety and security to government anymore. At least not everybody, or not as many people are. And more people are wanting to be able to take that on and exercise their right and defend themselves. And so I think you're seeing that shift. I think you're seeing it become, a really different conversation. And you're seeing the law move that direction too, in some places, right? You're seeing this big push in a lot of states for, so-called like constitutional carry or permitless carry, where people can just, as a mode carry without having to ask for government permission. And so you're seeing that shift happen in places. Now, the places that don't want you to be able to exercise your rights are doubling down and are certainly getting more aggressive, but you're seeing that shift in a lot of different areas.
How are they getting more aggressive?
Well, I mean, kind of like you were touching on, right? They're taking new tactics and they're going after different elements and different kind of points on possession. So, as soon as they lost the ability to just unilaterally deny people a license for any reason whatsoever, then they just reined in the license and basically, have created these fake so-called sensitive places, locational restrictions, to try and pen that in. Of course, we've seen more states pass these so-called assault weapons bans, and that they're getting broader and they're kind of encompassing more firearms than they have in the past. So some of this, the bad states are certainly doubling down, but that's why we have as many cases as we do.
So, well, true. What's the what's the basis in what's the motivation behind the assault weapons bans? Because, I mean, we've had an assault weapons ban in the past. The 1994 assault weapons ban was enacted. It wasn't renewed in 2004, in large part because the government's own data shows that it didn't do anything to reduce violent crime. So being that we have all this data, I mean, why is it so important to so many people to try to get these guns off the streets from really they're I mean, I guess we could step back and just say, even let's define the term assault weapon, right? They're sort of drawing a parallel between fully automatic military rifles, because they look like them, but they have not even close to the same functionality, to basic semi-automatic firearm that just happens to look scary. So how are they being so successful in launching all of these efforts and these laws to try to restrict this one classification firearms?
I mean, it's all about optics, right? They're demonizing these firearms so that they can attempt to ban them, right? They need to make these politicians, these anti-rights zealots, make people afraid. They scare people, and they intentionally try and demonize certain things and go after them, right? This is exactly, I mean, the gun control movement is all about control just as much as it's about guns. And this is exactly what happened before. I mean, a lot of these organizations, most of them, were focused on handguns a couple decades ago, right? And everybody was focused on handguns because, statistically speaking, handguns are the vast majority, the gun of choice in crime. Now, rifles are very limitedly used in crime, commission of crime, sorry. So they all went after handguns. And then, of course, you get the Heller opinion in 2008, where the court says, nope, handguns are protected under the Second Amendment. And now all these gun control groups need to make a pivot, right? They can't ban handguns anymore. The Supreme Court has said that they can. So they pivoted. And part of the pivot was to, semi-automatic rifles. And they've become more popular because they're versatile, because they're so usable, because they're, just a really great self-defense tool. And as a result, now that's been kind of the target of ire. So the reason that people want them banned is it's almost two different questions. Like, a lot of the public that is calling for the ban and kind of regurgitating some of these talking points just doesn't know what they're talking about, right? They don't understand the difference between a semi-automatic rifle or a fully automatic rifle or a select fire rifle. They just don't know what that difference is. They don't understand why, an adjustable stock is a safety feature more so than it is anything else, right? It doesn't make the firearm more lethal. It makes it more controllable for, I can use the same AR with an adjustable stock, and then my wife can use it and can adjust it so that it better fits her and it's safer for her to use. So the vast majority of the public just doesn't know and doesn't understand, and they call for a ban because activists are telling them to, and because they're scary. Now, the activists and the politicians are calling for a ban because they don't want you to be able to own firearms in general, and this is their current focus. They're focusing on this particular class of arms. And if they could get a handgun ban tomorrow, despite Heller, they would go for that too, right? They are after gun control, and they are going to go after whatever they can in order to do that.
And I think you draw a really important distinction, right? We have one group of people who has a political objective of disarming the public for whatever their motives are. I don't want to assume motive, although we can all suspect based on some of their other public statements what that might be. And then we have well-meaning people who want to do the right thing for their community and just don't understand guns, and they think they're scary. How do you reach people who are in that second category, right? Where they just, with a better understanding and also a better understanding of their own constitutional rights and the importance of being able to protect their family in certain situations. How do you win those folks over when there are so many vocal people on the other side mounting such effective national level campaigns and exploiting these tragedies like school shootings to push this gun control agenda across the country? Like, how do you overcome that?
Some people you just never will, right? Some people are just not interested in knowing the truth, and, so be it. And that is what it is. But for a lot of people, right, it's about education for part of it. And it's about a cultural shift. And I think you're seeing a cultural shift where more and more people are exercising their rights, talking about exercising their rights, and are getting out there and actually introducing people to what it is. I think a lot of the public is becoming more surprised to learn how many people are gun owners, and that it's not just their, the stereotypical image of what they think a gun owner might be. I think that's a big factor that you're starting to see play in, and that's starting to really have a shift. I also just think that it's not the same politically motivating factor for a lot of people anymore. Like, there's a lot of people who used to be, single issue anti-gun voters, and I just don't know if that's the case anymore. But I think a lot of that is because of a cultural shift, and that's really important of, talking about the culture around guns and gun owners, and having that kind of spectrum in the culture of people who are able to experience different gun owners and get into the world in their own way.
All right, so let me ask you this. Do you believe that all gun control is unconstitutional?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could. So if you're employing the Supreme, so I'm a lawyer. So if you're employing the Supreme Court test, the text as informed by history, right? It's the government's burden to show a historical analog for any, gun control ordinance that they're attempting to justify. And so that's a big side of it too. It's not even necessarily, people, want to ask us, what gun control law would be constitutional. I'm like, well, that burden isn't on me. The burden is on the government to demonstrate that their law is constitutional. And until they can do so with actual historical analogs and a significant amount of evidence, then they lose. And that's that's not just, me flipping the question on its head. That is also how our government is designed and how it's supposed to operate. We're not supposed, the citizenry has the rights, the individuals, the people have the rights. Government has to demonstrate that we gave it the authority via the Constitution to do whatever it's doing. And until government can demonstrate that it has the authority to do what it's doing under the Constitution, then the base level should be no, it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, agreed. It's like we have a sort of a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship that the federal government is supposed to have with the American people. And it's not just this issue. We see it with other issues right now as well.
Yeah. And that's like when I'm talking about like permitless carry. I hate the word permitless carry because the term permitless carry, because it implies that the status quo is a permit, but that there are some that don't require a permit. You shouldn't have to have a permit to exercise your rights. That's insane. The idea that you would have to get a permit from the government to speak or to have an X account or whatever, like it's such a flip on its head of how our system of government was designed and the entire intent behind the government and the Constitution that, in the enumerated powers granted to Congress.
So what sort of laws or restrictions would you support in order to prevent firearms from getting into the wrong hands?
I don't think that's, I understand the question, but I don't think that's necessarily the right question. I mean, people, unless you are a known dangerous person, right? And then you should be dealt with as if any, actual known convicted dangerous violent criminal would be. I mean, that's how you prevent that from happening. If somebody is because otherwise you get into this class system, because what you're really saying is that some people shouldn't be able to defend their lives. If you're saying that somebody cannot possess the most effective means of self-defense, you're functionally saying that their life is worth less. And so if you trust somebody and you have somebody in society as a member of our society that we, collectively entrust, then how do you create a class system between those people? How do you say that these people can defend their lives, but these people can't? And so I think at the end of the day, it's much more a question of actual, criminal law and punishment and, re-entry or anything like that than it is a question about gun ownership.
So I don't know if you saw this. The Surgeon General just announced I think it's been within the last week or so, that they want to label gun violence as a public health crisis. We saw this to full effect during the COVID pandemic and all the restrictions they put in place using usurped emergency powers. And I'm assuming they're going to try to do the same thing with guns here. What do you make about this policy shift?
Yeah, it's a moniker that they've been pushing for, decades. And a lot of people just, use the term out of convenience, but there's no such, there is no gun violence. There is violence that is perpetuated with guns. There's violence that is perpetuated with all sorts of tools, right? But it's kind of further in this idea of scaring people. And right, and you're hitting the nail on the head on, this is almost certainly a attempt to grant themselves more power, right? The government wants more power to regulate, more power to be able to step in. They want to be able to, flex their newly or, maybe not newly discovered emergency powers, but their, expanded, understood emergency powers that they feel that they have now. And it's really all just kind of another means to an end. It's very clear that they want to restrict gun ownership in this country. I think they're saying the quiet parts out loud these days, right? They just want to ban firearms as far as they can, as much as they can, and move that agenda forward. And this is just another tool, and they're going to use it, and they're going to try and weaponize it so that they can. We saw this in New Mexico, right? New Mexico declared a gun violence epidemic and tried to prohibit people from being able to carry arms in New Mexico, even permit holders in the state. Under an emergency powers declaration. So it's that on a national scale.
And it's something with this administration. I mean, it's obviously they lean left, so gun control is going to be part of the agenda just by default. But I've noticed a new trend emerging around the same time that the public health language started appearing. And that trend is where the government and the anti-gun lobby has been sort of manipulating data by classifying 18 to 19-year-old adults as children to inflate the child gun related homicide statistics. And it paints a distorted picture of what's really happening in the U.S. I mean, 89% of all firearm-related homicides are suicides and gang violence. And then you have another category that's accidental shootings, and then some that are justifiable homicides. So when you really break down the numbers, I mean, we're among the lowest nations on planet Earth for per capita firearm deaths in the U.S. I mean, what do you make of the constant gaslighting to the point where now they're trying to classify adults as kids to push this agenda?
Yeah, it's offensive, right? It comes back to the full circle, right? It's just them. All they care about is the ends. All they care about is, achieving their mission on banning or further regulating firearms, and they'll do anything to do it, and including twisting data. And why that's also so offensive is that it hides real important conversations. Right? So, the vast majority of firearm-related deaths are suicide. And so instead of having a conversation about that, they're twisting and pulling data to try and achieve their end. And so it's hiding some actual real things that we should be talking about, which is even, more problematic and more offensive in that sense of, they're twisting it to their policy goal. And instead of us being able to engage on something that is an actual topic that we should be talking about in the country.
Yeah. So there have been some recent victories. You touched on this earlier. The Supreme Court struck down the bump stock ban, thank God. And the pistol brace rule took a smack in the face by a Texas judge recently. I think you guys were involved. I mean, so how instrumental was FPC in both of those issues?
So the pistol brace case is our case. So I, helped launch that case. That's one of my babies. That's one that we have run since day one, and that's our litigation. So FPC is a plaintiff in that case. I'm an attorney on that case. It's called Mock v. Garland. So that's a huge victory, and that's one that we've been pushing for, and we've been working really hard for a year and a half, 2 years now on that issue. The bump stock case, we had our FPC Action Foundation has a case, Gades, that was pending before the court. The Cargill case was litigated by a group called NCLA. We filed briefs in support of Cargill in that case, addressing a couple different issues. Now, one thing that was huge is that FPC Action Foundation's brief was actually cited in the Cargill majority or in the Cargill opinion, and it laid out kind of the function of a semi-automatic firearm. So we kind of walked the court through how a firearm functions, including some images, some FPC images even, that the court looked at and used in order to show, Thomas kind of laid those out in his opinion, to show how a semi-automatic firearm actually functions, to distinguish a semi-automatic firearm with a bump stock from a machine gun. So, that was NCLA's case. We congratulate them on the victory. That was a huge win. But, we were able to influence and help, kind of achieve that goal in that one.
So in addition to the court cases, do you work directly with lawmakers and legislators on this stuff?
So at Action Foundation, we don't. We're just focused on litigation and education. FPC has done some stuff in the past, but really predominantly our focus is on litigation. The biggest impact and change that we can have is in the courts, and that's because politicians come and go, and you can never know if they're going to do what they say they're going to do, right? They're politicians. They're literally make a living off of just convincing everybody to like them. But the difference with courts is that court opinions have lasting impact. And if you can do what, we're able to do with, pistol braces, you can have a real lasting impact that doesn't ebb and flow, doesn't have an election cycle, and it really is what solidifies the actual proper interpretation of the Constitution. And that's the other big part of that, right? Is that in courtrooms, we're not arguing policy. My cases are not based on a policy decision or a policy choice. our cases are based on the actual original public meaning of the Constitution and of the Bill of Rights. And so it is a very straightforward court. Please, look at the history, look at the text of the amendment, and find that, the truth of the matter is that the government cannot do this. It does not have the power to do this.
It again, to piggyback on that, there's been some recent Supreme Court rulings that, excuse me, could impact this a little further, even though they're not really gun-related cases, one of them being the Chevron case, where the Supreme Court sort of took a wrecking ball to the administrative state, the ATF being included among the administrative state. What do you believe should be the role of the ATF?
I don't know that I still don't think it should exist. This is something that we've also kind of lost a conception on in our system of government. I mean, if you look at Article 1, the federal government doesn't have the authority to regulate firearms. It's not a power that was given to it. In fact, the only kind of reference to firearms as a power of Congress is the power to arm the militias in Article 1, Section 8. So at most, I guess the answer would be Congress could have a Department of Firearms that was solely responsible for arming people, like providing firearms to people. I think that might fall within their constitutional authority. But this shouldn't even be a federal government question. This should at most be a state police power question, and it should be at that state level. There should not be the federal prohibition on this so-called felon in possession ban, right? People who are convicted of a crime punishable by more than 1 year's imprisonment, gobbles up evil people, including a guy that was mowing lawns on the side to help provide for his family, but didn't disclose the income. And so he's forever prohibited from possessing a firearm. Or a guy that imported illicit cassette tapes in 1987. I mean, half the country doesn't even know what a cassette tape is anymore. And that guy's forever prohibited from possessing firearms by the federal government. It's just so far beyond any tether to the Constitution.
Now, are you guys completely funded by donations?
Yeah. So we're fully, supported, and we're able to do everything that we do based on donation, FPC based on its members and, those that donate above and beyond membership. And then same thing for FPC Action Foundation. It is completely the community of people who believe in our work, believe in our mission, see what we're doing, and want to be a part of that. And that's, why we exist, is to work and achieve that goal for the people.
Yeah, you got to have a big operation to take on this many cases. I mean, how many lawyers do you guys have there?
So we work with a network of attorneys. It's probably not as big as you'd expect, but it's easier to be able to do this much work and to be able to accomplish these things when it's as important as it is, right? And as motivating as it is. So our attorneys are awesome, and they do a ton of work, nights and weekends. It doesn't really matter. So it's much more about the people that are involved in the case too, right? Like, we're representing real human beings that are impacted by these laws. And so we're able to punch above our weight. That's for sure.
Nice. So what would you say are your priorities over the next 2 years or so?
I mean, I think you can look at our litigation. So if you, FPC, if you go to firearmspolicy.org, you can see our work and where it's focusing on, eliminating restrictions on access to common arms, to common magazines, to ensuring that people are able to, bear their arms in public and be able to protect themselves outside the home. Like we kind of we're very transparent with the focus of our work and where our work is aimed at.
And for people who may want to reach out to you to contact you or get involved, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so FPC is very active on social media, as most people who have encountered us are aware. So, at Gun Policy, you can follow along with the work and see what's going on. You can engage with us in the community. The team is really active there and make sure that they, talk with people and engage. You can also follow the work on the website. So firearmspolicy.org. You can see all of the cases. You can see all of the major filings in all the cases. Everything is incredibly transparent with what we're doing, where we're working, what work we're doing. There's also fpcactionfoundation.org, and so you can see some of our work there. Those are all really good ways to kind of follow along and engage. And then there's ways, of course, on the website to reach out to. If there's a situation that we're not aware of or that we should know, there's ways on the website to be able to contact us.
I'm going to jump in and recommend one more, which is your Instagram page, because it is hilarious, bro. I don't know who does your memes, but it's one of the funniest accounts I follow.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's hilarious to me how often I'll be out in public, just, going out, meeting people, talking with people, and immediately everybody's like, so, do you run the Twitter, or do you run the Instagram, or do you run the X? And I'm like, oh, no, I'm actually, one of the attorneys on the case, and I litigate the cases. And they're like, oh, yeah. So it always cracks me. And the guys that work and engage with the community are awesome and really understand what we're all about too. That's really important.
Well, again, you are the tip of the spear on a lot of this stuff. So thank you for all the work you're doing fighting for constitutional rights. Again, these aren't gun rights. These are constitutional rights that are God-given, and the Constitution just tells the federal government what it cannot do. So we all appreciate the work that you're doing, and hopefully we can have some more big wins on these cases for so many communities throughout the country who need them. Cody, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.